I am Brad Keelor. She is Susan Burns. Next up on the first of our two very special holiday director's cuts, find out how all the solid waste in the civil engineering department at Georgia Tech went through the chair's office.
I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and children listen.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every single week, I sit down with a different Geo-Institute member. They regale us with many fine stories about their time on this sphere. Some of them are personal, some are professional, all of them are fun. If you don't know anything about the Geo-Institute, after you watch this today, you should head over to geoinstitute.org. While you are there, you will find out we are a technical society with about 12,000 members, most of whom are geotechnical engineers and or geologists, and that we are part of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I did not just wake up this morning with this on my head, which is really fortunate because I can't imagine what my hair would look like if that had been a situation. I chose to put this there. It is the first of our two annual holiday episodes of Director's Cut. And we thought, who better to bring in than one of our two brand new board members in the GI, faculty member from the Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. It's Susan Burns. Susan, welcome.
Thanks so much, Brad. Very happy to be here.
Just like we do every week, we have 10 questions. 2 of them are the same, and we always start out with one of the ones everybody gets, so you are forced to describe your job in 45 seconds.
Yeah, so thanks. So I am a faculty member at Georgia Tech. I'm a professor in civil engineering, and I teach courses in geotechnical engineering. So I teach the undergrad course in soil mechanics, and then I also teach graduate courses in landfill design and management and ground improvement. So that's half of what I do. In addition, I work closely with graduate students on research in geo-environmental engineering. And then I also have a half-time appointment as an associate chair in the school as well. And in that job, I'm the associate chair for administration and finance. So that brings together budget and space and IT and staffing issues. So basically, if you take everything that makes a faculty member angry and put it in one job, that's what I do.
That sounds so simple and fun, and what could go wrong? And we're going to talk a little bit about that job a little bit later on in the show. For now, my follow-up question for that. Obviously, when you look at your average undergrad and your average grad student, there are some differences that would be readily apparent. I noticed when I got to grad school, I was like, whoa, everybody's taking this so seriously all of a sudden. What is a difference between the undergrads and the grad students that might not be so readily apparent?
Yeah, so that's a great question. One of the first thing I learned when I was a teaching assistant was that when you have a lab for undergraduate students and you're buying treats, you can buy Coke for the undergrads and they'll drink it. When you have a lab for graduate students, you have to buy Diet Coke. That's the most.
Oh, that's not where I thought that was going. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was interesting, actually. It was a very interesting difference.
I think there was going to be alcohol involved.
Well, yeah, that's after hours labs.
That's really good, though, and I wouldn't have picked that. Very, very good. So we all know what time of year. Well, I guess maybe not everybody knows what time of year it is. Look at your calendar, then you'll know what time of year it is. This is really hard-hitting stuff that we get after on Director's Cut. Real or artificial Christmas tree, and why?
Yeah, straight to the heart of the matter for sure. So for me and my family, it is always real Christmas trees. I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and my dad was an aerospace engineer with NASA. My mom was a research chemist who worked on solid rocket fuel for the lunar missions. So they were pretty classic non-shopping scientists and engineers, as you would guess. Except Christmas trees. And it turns out that my dad was the Garten of Christmas trees. And so our family, about mid-December, would take an entire Sunday and we would visit every Christmas tree lot in Huntsville, Alabama, looking for the absolute perfect choice. So for me, they're really fond memories, right? Looking back and just going out and spending time with my family, my parents, my brother, and my sister, just really, really pleasant days. So
did you guys ever cut your own, or was it always off a lot?
Yeah, so when we moved to Charlottesville, my husband and I, when we had no kids, and then when our kids were very young, we would go out and cut our own. But it just got to be too much in Atlanta. So these days we still buy fresh trees, but we go to the nursery to get them.
I guess the other natural follow-up here, and I promise we're not going to have 6 gazillion follow-up questions here, but there's just a lot coming at the top of the interview. Sometimes you just can't stop it. What's your greatest Christmas tree disaster then? Because you must have one, getting a real tree every year.
No, we never had one. So we're engineers. My husband's an engineer also. So we're pretty careful to pay attention to the details of the structural positioning of the tree and keep it up. My grandfather one time did slip off the ladder and come all the way down a fully decorated Christmas tree. So That's about as close as I get.
That still counts. You had one, so that's pretty good. We always ask a research question on Director's Cut, and it's always third, and I don't know why that is, but that's just tradition now, and after over 100 episodes, we're not messing with that. What we have to ask you about, you do a lot of work with fly ash, beneficial use of waste materials, dredged soil. We talked a little bit about fly ash before we started recording, and that was the winner.
Yeah.
I'm just going to let you go.
Okay, good. So I've done a lot of work in my career with Southern Company and Georgia Power as well, too, looking at the ash that's in their ponds. So this is fly ash that what we would call legacy ash. So it's been disposed of. In some cases, the deposits are 70 or 80 years old even. So it's been out in the southeastern U.S. weathering, being changed over time. So it ages, the material properties change as well, too, because you're leaching things out of the fly ash. And essentially, what you'll see is we're in a little bit of a crisis right now, strangely enough, because we have these historic fly ash deposits that we're managing differently because of a couple of pretty spectacular failures that have occurred over the last decade or so. But at the same time, our energy profile has changed substantially. So we're burning much less coal than we used to. And what that means is that we produce less fly ash, and that seems like a good thing overall, but it does actually cause us some problems because many concrete DOTs, or many concrete specifications from DOTs require the use of fly ash in the concrete that's put on state or federal highways. And what you'll see is that over time, with the reduced production of ash, that means that we are running into shortages at various times, mostly in intense construction seasons, where we're not actually producing enough new fly ash to meet the demand. So what that has meant, and this is going to sound unbelievable, but it's true. We have on occasion had to import fly ash from other countries. So it's not uncommon to see us import ash from India and ash from China. So part of what we try to do in our group is look at these literally hundreds of millions of tons of fly ash that we have throughout the country now and see if we can go back in and harvest that ash. So this has been produced maybe 10, 20 years ago. And what we're studying is the properties of that ash, how they've changed over time, and whether or not we can dig up this old ash and put it into concrete without any detriment to the concrete. So it's hopefully we'll get to the point where we can come in and recycle a lot of this ash that right now is just being held in old disposal ponds. We call them ponds, or in some cases landfills around the country.
That's pretty fascinating. And so I have to ask, and maybe you are not aware whether this is happening or not. Do you have anybody in the policy world at Georgia Tech that's looking at the implications of, essentially this new dependence on international sources of these waste materials?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's a great question, right? Because what you're going to see, for example, Duke Energy had a failure in one of their ash ponds, and part of what their solution was is that they had to dig up all their ash, put it in trucks, and drive it to a modern landfill, a modern engineered landfill. So when you look at that, what that means is you're going into these plants, and a lot of times now there are neighborhoods that surround these power plants. You're driving dump trucks 24 hours a day through these people's neighborhoods. You're transporting the ash from North Carolina. Much of it is actually being disposed in Georgia now. So they're driving hundreds of miles to truck this ash in different places. So what that means is that there are really serious policy implications for how we're managing these ashes these days. So I'm not working on that, but there are professors who do work with that. Kind of the other question, or the other part of this, is fly ash is also a repository of rare earth elements. And rare earth elements are required in almost all of the electronics that we use today. Problem is that the United States doesn't control rare earth element deposits of any significance, right?
And so many of them are in areas that we're so friendly with.
Exactly. So there's lots of policy implications there. So I have a collaboration with one of our environmental engineering professors where we're looking at a two-stage treatment to extract rare earth elements and then take the remaining ash and use that in beneficial use applications like concrete.
That's pretty good. And what an interesting line of work, and could prevent us from having to go to South Sudan to get yttrium or molybdenum or anything like that.
Lots of complicated policy
issues. And as we get more and more reliant on those devices, which nobody really seems to be changing the manufacturing principles or procedures of, here we are. Wow, that is really fascinating. Oh, we picked a good one to talk about. And one that we teased at the beginning, and then you mentioned in the first question, is that you have this, you say half-time, right? But it doesn't mean you're not full-time with the other stuff. So are you a 150% employee of Georgia Tech at this point? As the admin and finance chair, when you got that job, what was the most shocking part of it to you?
Yeah, so I had been undergraduate chair for 5 years as well. So I thought there was nothing that could surprise me when I came into this job. But after I'd been working for about 3 or 4 months, after I'd been working for a couple of days, I realized that the school chair's bathroom was adjacent to my office. So the offices are side by side. The school chair has a bathroom, private bathroom, and I routinely would hear the facilities as I was working in my new office. About 3 or 4 months into the job, the school chair was traveling, was out of the country, and I started hearing the toilet flushing in his office. And I thought, that's strange. But then it didn't stop, and it just kept flushing and flushing and flushing. And so I went over to take a look, and it turns out that the toilet in the school chair's office was overflowing and would not stop overflowing. So we called Georgia Tech facilities in, sent somebody out, and immediately they realized that we had a clog downstream from the school chair's office, which meant that they had to close every bathroom in the 5-story tower, which was above that point, because all of the sewage in the building drains through the school chair's office. So that was a mess, as you can imagine. We ended up having to close all of the bathrooms in the building for a couple of days. The plumbers came in. They were able to eventually find the clog, but they couldn't fix the clog. And so we got to the point where it had been so much time that they decided they were going to have to cut into the concrete pad foundation of the building and basically just dig out the pipe, cut it, replace it. But eventually the next morning, they tried one last time to unclog it, and they were able to drill out the clog and bring it back in through the school chair's office.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. So it turns out that our building had been renovated about 4 years before that, and all the construction debris was not carefully controlled, and much of it ended up in the sewer. And so the clog had just accumulated over time. Eventually, they got it cleared out. They did a complete redo in the school chair's office. They redid my office. It all turned out okay, but it was, I'll have to say, as soon as the clog started, I bolted upstairs and moved into Rudy Bonaparte's office for a couple of months. So turned out all right, though.
I'm sure he didn't mind. Now, the two things that come to mind here, one is you didn't think you were going to have to deal with waste materials in that part of your job. And the other thing is, how many awful puns did people make to you about what you had to do as part of the new job? I can only imagine.
Indeed, it was quite the metaphor, for sure.
But you got all four degrees, Susan, we talked about before, not just 3 like most human beings who go all the way through grad school. You got 4 degrees, and they were all from Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
You went off to teach at UVA, and we'll talk a little bit more about Charlottesville later on, and you came back to Georgia Tech in 2004. What was it like to come back after having been a student there and now, getting paid to be there and everything?
Yeah, it's really, really such a privilege. And I can't say enough good things about UVA. I love that place very much. It was a wonderful place to teach and wonderful colleagues. But I think there's something really special about coming back to your alma mater to teach, especially your undergraduate alma mater. So I still had most of my faculty mentors were here on the faculty when I returned. So that was really being able to call them colleagues was very very wonderful, very moving at the time. And I think tech students are really, I will say, a very special kind of student. They're very intense, very hardworking, very committed, and very much want to be engineers. So it's really, really such a wonderful place to teach. It's really a great privilege to be back.
How much do you feel like having that network of colleagues that you already knew in a lot of cases help your teaching? Because even though everybody has that as they go through grad school, when you go off someplace else, you might not be in contact with those people enough or as much. Do you feel like it made a big difference for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. When I was an undergrad, tech was a pretty brutal place, honestly. There was not a lot of emphasis on undergraduate teaching. And so the thing I will say that made the most difference for me, when I went to UVA, they had a teaching and resource center, basically just to help improve your teaching. And so I did a year-long fellowship there, and we would, it was great. And in the UVA style, we'd get together for a cocktail hour, and then we would discuss and reflect on teaching. But it was really done at a very high level with very serious scholarship and very concrete tools to help us improve the way we taught. So I spent a lot of time there, and I'd say that was what was really fundamentally changing for me as far as how I teach these days.
We're going to stay, I think, with Georgia Tech here for a minute. The other question we ask everybody, and it's a nostalgia question for many, I think, is how did you first get involved with ASCE and GI? And I'm going to assume it was at Georgia Tech.
It was. So I was a graduate student at Georgia Tech. And this was even before the GI was formed. So I guess the institutes were formed in 96 or 97, right, something like that. Yeah. So my first ASCE conference was GeoEnvironment 2000, which was held in New Orleans during Mardi Gras. So that was a very different conference experience in many ways. I remember I was flying from Atlanta to New Orleans, and I was on a 747, and virtually everybody on the plane was already dressed for Mardi Gras and already prepared for Mardi Gras. I will say
they weren't having Diet Coke.
No, there had been a lot of pre-gaming going on, actually. I remember we were supposed to take off, and the pilot came on and said, "Sorry, we can't leave just yet. We have to load more ice on the plane." And wow, people went nuts. So that was an interesting experience. But the conference itself was great. So David Daniel and Yeltsin Najjar had organized the conference. There's a lot of energy at that time. And for me, I was still a relatively young graduate student. So I was traveling with our faculty then, and that was amazing. It was the first time I ever met Jim Mitchell, David Daniel, Ed Kavazanjian. So I was a little bit starstruck at the time. So for me, that was really the pinnacle of conference experiences in many ways.
And then later on, you served on the Technical Coordination Council for GI, and I don't know how long you were on that, either 3 or 6 years, because most of that predated my time. What was your TCC experience like?
Yeah, so I actually had to cut my council service short, but I had another conflict come up, so I couldn't do the full term. But it was good. It was very good. So I think that at the time, the GI was at a time of transition. The nice thing about that, what I really enjoyed about that was insight into how the conference planning is done, what the philosophy is, getting a little bit more understanding of the process and how it's developed.
And now, since October, you're on the GI board, and we'll hit you with a question about that in a few minutes. First, we'll talk to the viewers, and we'll say, Susan mentioned the Geo-Environment Conference in 2000. That happens every 8 years, and the next installment will be in 2024. Look early next year for the call for abstracts and for more information about the next iteration of that conference. Now we have to go back to your UVA days. And if people haven't been to Charlottesville, it's not exactly a metropolis, but it's not a tiny town either. And there's a lot there to do. So even though it's been a while since you lived there, what are your Charlottesville must-dos?
Yeah, so I loved Charlottesville so much. We had such a great time there. And our daughter was born there as well, too. So any trip to Charlottesville has to start with a Bodo's Bagel for sure. And there's multiple locations, so any of those are good. There's lots and lots of great hiking in the area. So we spent a lot of time outdoors while we were there. Great restaurants, just incredible food there too. So the C&O was one of our favorites. There's a couple classic inns, the Ivy Inn, the Silver Thatch Inn, which I think is now closed. That was our favorite anniversary place. Charlottesville has a downtown mall, which has retained the old buildings and then put in some really nice restaurants and entertainment venues there as well. There's Fridays after 5, so there are free concerts on the mall and the amphitheater there. Just a really great city. Of course, at the end of the day, you have to go to Monticello as well for the tour there. But I also recommend Highland, which is down the road from Monticello, which was James Monroe's house as well. And that's owned by William and Mary. So the people who do the tours there are actually graduate students who are doing research, and very, very informative, very interesting. And they try a little bit harder, I think, in some ways too. So it's a really enjoyable experience.
A very cool area, and I can vouch for a lot of that. I think one thing is too, I mean, the sports teams are not too bad, I guess. That's another thing. But you get some pretty decent concerts in Charlottesville because it is not right next to either DC or Richmond. Often performers make a Charlottesville stop. Yeah. So if you ever want to go to Central Virginia, I think Charlottesville would be a good home base. And you can certainly branch out from there and see some other stuff outside that area too. I'm always looking for new questions to ask people on Director's Cut. And I had not asked this one yet. And so, Susan, you are the lucky recipient of what is the last video game you played?
Yeah, so that's probably Pong, which I just read celebrated its 50th anniversary. Not a big gamer, so it's been a long time. When my kids were little, we did play Wii a little bit, but not too much.
I think it's the best. The Wii was great for that. And I'm a little sad that it's moved on to different incarnations, because it really did get a lot of people playing games that probably wouldn't have otherwise. Wii bowling and skiing and stuff like that. Tennis was fantastic.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be bad if Pong was the last one. I mean, I think there'd be a lot of people out there who might tell you haven't missed a lot. So it's all right. So we did mention that you just started a term on the Geo-Institute board, and we are very excited to have you on board the board as it is. For you, what's the most exciting aspect of starting a term on the GI board?
Yeah, so I think for me, this is such a great time to be a civil engineer. I feel like the profession is coming into another golden age in the sense that maybe the motivation isn't quite as great, but we have lots of big problems that we have to solve, right? And these are very serious, complex, systems-wide, global scale kinds of problems. And I think that is going to force another age of innovation and creativity. And I see that reflected in the work that I see my colleagues doing all over the country, right? All over the world, really. So I think that we're in for a new, maybe a new way of seeing the problems that we've dealt with traditionally. I think also, too, when I look at this generation of students, the world has changed for them. And I think that they don't see the world in the same way that my generation did. And I think that's good because it's going to force us to think differently, right? They were born in 9/11 and then they went through a serious recession and then a COVID pandemic, right? What they value is different than what previous generations have valued. And I think that's going to change the way that we engineer. So I think from that perspective, what ASCE can do and what the GI as an institute within the ASCE can do, I think there's really unlimited opportunities for us to think differently these days. And so I feel very excited to be a part of the visioning that's going on now and moving that forward.
I'd be curious to get your thoughts on this too. I feel like one of the things that's changed a lot and maybe led to some of the things that you're talking about is a lot of the divisions that existed even 15 or 20 years ago just aren't there now. And I think it's true whether it's in research or whether it's in societal things like music or TV or film. I remember a time in my life where if you listened to like alternative rock, you could not also listen to like Aerosmith. That was like,
right.
That was just like a badge of shame. And I feel like that has bled over a little bit into our traditional research disciplines as well. Do you notice that?
Yeah, for sure. I think you're exactly right. That I think that in some ways, we put up artificial divisions, I'll call them, that we tended to stay very siloed in our profession, right? And these days, I think that we can't do that anymore, right? That the solutions that we need will force us to cross disciplines and to leverage and optimize what we learn in one area in other areas as well. So I think for sure, I think that's the beauty too about being in a university, right? Where you think of an idea, there's always somebody else who's interested in collaborating and thinking about those ideas as well too. So I think that's where we're headed. The question is if we get there fast enough, right?
Yeah, and I think also another important point to that is I think if we don't do it on our own, the funding agencies are probably going to force it to happen.
That's true.
Or strongly recommend it. Maybe that's the better word.
Big carrots, right?
So we had a holiday question at the very beginning, and we're going to end with one here too, because we have to, because it's December, and somewhere presumably it's snowing. It's like 50 and really disgusting here, but at the palatial Keelor estate in Virginia, but somewhere it is snowing and holiday-esque. What is your favorite or least favorite, or you can give us one of each, holiday song of all time?
Yeah, so that's a hard distinction because I love music and love a lot of ranges of different types of music. I think I'm going to go with "O Come All Ye Faithful," the Pentatonics version specifically. Really love theirs because they mix it up with some different rhythms. Least favorite, I'm probably going to have to go with "Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer."
You see, I don't know. I feel like that's one that a lot of people have to love to hate, though. There's a house near us that has one of those elaborate displays that's synced to music, and they change the songs every year, but every year there are two that are included. One is the Clemson fight song, because obviously there are Clemson graduates in that house, and the other one is Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer. That's in the lineup every year.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'd want to listen to it every day, but that one time at that one house, it's pretty good. But those are both good choices.
Yeah. Grandma might be a little too easy, right? I'll think more about that.
Well, Susan, you made it through all 10 questions. If your term on the board is this easy, you're in for a great time. And I personally hope it is, because anything difficult that happens to the board is going to happen to me too. So let's keep it pretty simple and happy over the next several years. Again, we're really excited to have you. For our viewers, if you liked what you saw today, and you probably did because here you are at the end, click like, subscribe, get notifications, and we will, of course, very lovingly let you know every time we post something new to the YouTube channel. Susan, thank you so much for doing this. I hope it was fun.
It was very much. Thank you for having me.
Have a great holiday season, and to all of our viewers, there will be only one more episode of Director's Cut in 2022, and we will see you with that episode next week.